Season 1, Episode 8. Welcome to Forever Break Podcast. Now, with a bottle of cheap wine and a red-toothed smile, here are your hosts, Lianne and Corey.
Great introduction. Thanks, Mr. Voiceover Guy.
Hey, if you like that one, I got 5 more in the chamber.
No. One is enough for now.
Yeah, I mean, we're good. Thank you. But we really appreciate it anyway. Anywho, welcome to Forever Break Podcast. Leanne, how are you?
I'm fantastic as usual. How are you, Corey?
Fan-lovely.
Fan-lovely?
Yeah.
That's it. Get your own adjective.
I'll just make them up.
Fine. On this pod today, we are going to be looking at attraction and resistance. How much control do we really have in our lives? Understanding what we have control over and accepting those things that we don't. And why do we create barriers and tend to think more about the things we can't do, don't have, or didn't achieve, rather than the positive opposites?
Yeah, all good questions and some tips for practicing mindful attraction to get what we want out of life in an interview with the author Paige Oldham, who recently published her latest book, The Mindful Guide to the Law of Attraction.
And remember, everybody, if you want to take a deeper dive into anything we discuss here and then some, make sure you visit the Forever Break website, foreverbreak.com, for that.
Quick quote.
So today's quote is from a Mr. Henry Ford, who said, "If you say you can or you can't, you're right either way."
Fascinating.
Yeah. All about manifesting what you say.
True that.
Focus on.
All right, well, let's focus on mindful attraction and resistance. Have you ever realized that you want to make an active change in your life, such as moving to a new location, getting a different job that would be more fulfilling, or simply waking up happier and more positive every day? Have you had these types of thoughts and then seen some time pass and noticed that nothing has changed and wondered why?
Well, this is what we're going to talk about today. As individuals, there are very few things in this life that we can actually control, and they all start with our mindset and thought process. Yep, I know, I'm very aware it sounds corny. If I wish it to be true hard enough, it will happen. The argument against this is usually along the lines of, I can't wish $1 million into my bank account.
But have you ever considered that you're wishing for the wrong things? What is $1 million worth to you? Would you trade a lifetime of joy and happiness for that money?
No, but I would be on a beach somewhere right now. Would I, though?
I don't know what
Only
you'd do.
if I could buy my own beach.
You're quarantined. There's not much you can do. So what we're learning today is to focus our mind on things we can control. What we will learn is that over time we can change our mindset, and things we want to see change will actually begin to manifest.
The last couple of months have been an eye-opening experience for most of us. Seeing how easily our lives can be completely flipped upside down is extremely humbling. Mm-hmm. Are you angry that you aren't working? Are you scared for yourself or your family and friends? Whether they might get sick, or maybe you or they are struggling financially? Is the factor of uncertainty stressing you out? Don't worry, you're not alone. It's stressing us out as well.
Really, everyone is in the same boat, and it makes it a very unique time. So what are our options? We can sit and dwell on things like this, but what good is that really going to do? Everyone needs a good moan every now and again, right, Lianne?
I am a strong advocate of moaning, everybody.
She really is. But after we have that venting, what actions do we take?
We think this is a great time to just slow down and be present in our minds. We can reflect on what is driving these negative thoughts and then make a point to confront them regularly. If we notice these negative thoughts coming into our heads, we should have a plan that triggers a new thought process.
Let me give you an example of this. Since the development of COVID-19, maybe you have lost your job and are struggling to come up with money for food, housing, or any other basic needs. The uncertainty of not knowing when or if you will return to work is another daily stress. This is something you do not have control over to a certain extent.
But if you are in this position, first of all, we feel for you.
Absolutely.
Second of all, we bet you are sick of the negative thoughts and constant worry that it creates. So take some time to consider what you can control.
Yeah, so if you're struggling financially, have you consistently made sure you are aware of all the resources the government has made available to you? Have you looked for other jobs that may not necessarily be what you want to do, or may be below your current pay grade, but they could bridge the gap? When the stress becomes too much, have you gotten outside? Have you exercised or done something to express that feeling, which we obviously cover in our episode on self-expression? These are all just some tools that we recommend.
Yeah, and the point of this is that these are hard times and life happens to be full of them. Making the decision to actively notice the negative thoughts happening and finding a way to trigger a pivot point is actually key right now. So once you start worrying about money, try to make your mind jump to possible solutions. Have I asked friends and family? Have I checked local job placement companies, etc.?
Yeah, we realize this can sound unrealistic, but did you ever think that that thought in and of itself is simply resistance? What if you just said, F it, I got nothing to lose, and for the next week, month, year, I'm just going to try. I'm going to try and spin those negative thoughts and the concerns and the doubts that I have and make them into something positive. Yeah, we are not experts in this, but I have been practicing these types of things for a few years now. I was thankful for an employee that I've had that kind of showed me the light and just kind of said, you know what, just give it a shot. And it's something that has just kind of developed into a healthy practice for me. I allow negative thoughts to happen because, well, I'm human just like you, and it does happen. But what I have done is practice not dwelling. Allow the negative thoughts to occur, observe it, and then try to chart the path towards solving the issue, or at least finding a place where I can be grateful. If things get really bad, just being grateful that you have the mental capacity to be able to think and analyze thought is a great starting point.
But being as we're not the experts, why don't we talk to someone who is? So let's get on with our interview.
Interesting interview.
Today's guest is Paige Oldham, who is the author of the new book, The Mindful Guide to the Law of Attraction. She has also released a full-color journal called The Joy of Now, which helps a reader to practice mindfulness in just 5 minutes a day. Paige also runs the website simplemindfulness.com, where she has many articles covering an array of self-help topics. We are beyond grateful to have the opportunity to talk to someone who has practiced this subject for so long, and hope you find her as engaging as we do.
Okay, so today we have Paige. Welcome to the show, Paige. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Of course, it's our pleasure. So, I'm just going to jump straight into the questions here. So, attraction and resistance might be terms some of our listeners may not be familiar with. So, can you please explain what they mean to you?
So attraction, I think, a lot of people understand if you're attracted to another person, but on a broader scheme and concepts like the law of attraction, it's whatever you attract to yourself in your life. Whatever you put your energy toward is what you attract. So kind of on the idea of resistance, there's that saying, whatever you resist persists, even though it's something you don't want and you're resisting it. In your subconscious, you're holding on to it. So as long as you resist and say, I don't want that, your mind doesn't know anything other than, I want that, and brings more of it. So by resisting, you're actually attracting.
Interesting. Yeah.
And then this is just kind of a topic that I think is pretty new to Lianne.
Yeah.
But for me, it's something that kind of got introduced to through an employer that I had in Denver a few years ago. But one of the things that caught my mind, or it just kind of caught my attention, was on your website. And it's a quote that says, "Someone can only drive you crazy if you give them the keys." And it got me thinking more about it, and I read it immediately as people in your life, your boss, your spouse, your kids, etc. But then I started thinking that I could also give the keys to the voice in my head. And I'm just kind of wondering, can you unpack what you meant by that quote and expand on the idea of control a little bit?
Sure. So the idea of someone can only drive you crazy if you give them the keys is someone can only bother you if you choose to allow it. And a lot of people have a hard time with that one because they think, well, they're just doing these things. They know it drives me crazy. You have a choice in how you respond to that. You don't have to be driven crazy. It's like if your kids are, sort of driving you crazy, one thing, you could ignore them. With kids, it's not a good thing to do. The other is to, instead of it just driving you crazy, you could focus your attention on it. Or the other person. So if the other person's driving you crazy, it's usually either one, that's just the way they are and they're not going to change. And to the point of control, you have no control over them. You can badger them and yell at them and do whatever you want to them. You're not going to change them. It's your deal, not theirs. So if it's just a part of their nature, the only choice really is to ignore it or accept it. And ignoring is kind of a way to accept it. It's just the way it is. Deal with it, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
The other is if somebody's driving you crazy, like your kids, stop and figure out what's going on. For the most part, people don't just want to drive you crazy because it's driving them crazy to have to put out all that effort. So figure out what's going on. With little kids, usually feeding them helps. But even if as an adult, give them your undivided attention. And it doesn't take very much just to figure out what's going on, what the real issue is. And then, see if you can work with that. But it's always a choice as to whether you let them drive you crazy. So whether you ignore it, just accept it and walk away, do something about it. There's always, this full gamut of things you could do besides just being annoyed. So the idea of a voice in your head, I call that the monkey mind, and everybody has a monkey. You can't get rid of it. There's nothing you can do. Years and years of meditation can quiet it down a little bit, but it's always going to be there. So, that the monkey who's screeching in your head, who's, feeding you all these negative thoughts, that's not you. And just as you can focus your attention on another person or ignore or just observe and then say, okay, are you done yet? That's what you can also do with that voice in your head is, okay, if you're driving, this little voice is telling me something over and over, well, stop ignoring it and address it. Usually facing things head on is the best way to just kind of make it go away.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And that's kind of where that thought came to me when I read that quote because I think that just for a lot of people, that voice just goes and goes and goes and doesn't ever get any sort of leash put on it, or even just like a magnifying glass or something of like, that's an interesting thought. Why does that keep coming into my head? I should at least question this a little bit. And people just don't take the time to quiet that down a little bit. And I think that it seems to be a lot of what you're talking about as we've been researching you a little bit more, and just kind of asking those questions and getting those kinds of conversations going with yourself and then also the people that are around you that might have an effect on you.
But just that voice in your head, so many people think that is me. It's a part of me, that, it's who I am. And in the land of mindfulness, it is not you. It's the monkey. And it's, I call the real you, the capitalized true self. It's your heart. What's in your heart? The monkey's in your head. And there's, I've sort of written a lot about head versus heart. And ultimately, the heart is always the way to go. That's what's going to make you happy. Your head is the logical, screeching monkey, all the other people in your life telling you what you should do. That's, it may be good for them, but it may not be good for you. So being able to sort of objectively observe the monkey and just watch it screech and kind of say, gee, that's curious, instead of like getting all wrapped up in the emotions that it causes, but just stepping back and, seeing the voice as just a monkey having a fit. And it starts to, it seems kind of ridiculous when you look at it that way and think, wow, is that really what goes on in my head? Yeah. And then you can kind of step back and start to do something.
Yeah, I love that you call
it
the monkey. It makes it so much, like visualizing it just makes it so much more simple, I think. It's just like, oh, okay, yeah, that does make sense. But one thing I've noticed throughout all of our interviews here is the correlation between mindfulness and control. And it doesn't matter what area of mindfulness we are exploring, everyone seems to come back with mindfulness is just taking control. It's just understanding what you can and cannot control and just not letting it affect you. And like many of our listeners, I'm sure, I've watched the movie The Secret, and the law of attraction sounds appealing. However, there seems to be a missing ingredient, and it appears to be mindfulness. So what's the danger of practicing the law of attraction without practicing mindfulness? I
would say that's how I attempted to practice the law of attraction for the first bunch of years when The Secret first came out. I had it on, way back on CDs and listened to it, 1,000 times. And I thought, if I just keep listening to it, it'll get ingrained in me and it'll just work. Yeah. And I'm a very analytical person. I'm like a numbers finance kind of person. I'm like, if I just think about it hard enough, it'll happen. Yeah. In the meantime, I had like total disconnect with my emotions and what I really thought and believed. And, for years it was like, okay, this just doesn't work. My husband, on the other hand, like didn't even realize he does it. And it like, he'll think about something and attract it in short order, like so exactly the way he was thinking. I'm like, how do you do that? You just thought about it. And he's just like, well, I don't know. And I'm like, it's your mojo. You just have the mojo and I don't have it. Well, it took a few years to, just call it my personal development journey and getting a little older. It's not just thinking about it. Yeah. So when you lay the mindfulness on top of it, like I said in the beginning, even though you're resisting things, like whatever is built into your subconscious with all your lifetime of experiences and beliefs and anything that's gone on for you, that creates kind of the rose-colored glasses that you're seeing everything through. So by laying on mindfulness onto the law of attraction, I can say, I really, I want $1 million. I want $1 million. But if everything in your core says you don't deserve it, you're not good enough, why should you get that? But I want it, and affirmations and everything on top of it, it's never going to happen. So you've got to use, by using mindfulness, you can start to shed a light on what's really going on inside me. What are my true beliefs about myself? For so many, and it definitely was for me, it's like, am I worthy? Am I good enough? And I started having dialogues in my own head, like, good enough? Well, who says what's enough? Who defines
like,
that?
What's good? I don't know.
I kind of went down a rabbit trail to my childhood on that one. Yeah.
That's funny.
But I wish more people would sit there and ask those questions.
Yeah, and it took me decades to even think of asking the question, which is crazy. But, it's just, am I enough? What is good enough? And I spent, most of my life chasing good enough. And, well, I was almost the top of the class, but I wasn't the top of the class. What's wrong with me kind of thing. So it's crazy. And then, the grand scheme of things, why does it matter? So
I'm curious if maybe, based on your journey, but I just kind of see that people seem to just punish themselves, like what you were saying, like I took second in a class of 600 people, but I wasn't first. And they just go like they can dwell on that versus just being like, what about the 598 people that you did take? But regardless, and it led me to the idea of, and I wanted to ask you, do you think people are naturally glass half empty types? And if so, why do you think that their minds sway towards dwelling on the negative?
I think society programs you to, just so much of, you're born and, you start school, well, you're put in classes where you're instantly compared to groups of other people. And did you make the grade? And how are you going to make your parents look to other parents? And so it's like there's this game you always have to keep up with. And, some people play the game and some people give up on it. And, they're judged and labeled certain ways, which creates, a whole nother problem. So I think just societal beliefs, are always, like, why are you any better than me? Or, you don't deserve to be happy. It's kind of crazy if you're like, hey, how you doing? You're like, I am awesome. And usually the person asking the question is like, awesome. Why are you awesome? Nobody's awesome. You don't deserve to be awesome. You can't be if I'm not. And it's like, well, you could choose to be if you wanted to.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like really old belief system.
Yeah, it's all about the power of what is controlling
right.
it, isn't it?
So all you really can control is yourself and what's in your head.
Exactly. And I guess taking that idea of society's kind of laid out these goals and things that we should have, or these rules, and we know it's important to have goals and dreams for our lives, and this gives us direction and purpose, but sometimes we can get too caught up in the nitty-gritty, the how will it happen, and etc. And how do you suggest listeners can learn to let go of this process, and where is the balance between being active and then being passive?
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, nothing's going to happen if you don't take action. But knowing that you can't control whatever you're, exerting your action on, so you can figure out a how, but that how is not going to dictate sort of the end result. And I say you leave it up to the universe, and sometimes the universe has better plans for you than you could have imagined. So, I want to go from point A to point B. So it's my job to really want that in my heart, in my core. There's nothing in my subconscious that could tell me there's no way I could get there, and I'll deal with that first. So I'm going to go from A to B. I come up with the plan. What do I do today, every day, to take action to get from A to B? And I take those actions. Well, maybe, I always say expectations are the root of all evil. If I set my expectations on getting to B, and life throws something at me and it pushes me towards C, and C is actually a lot cooler. But if I have all these expectations hung up on B, I won't be happy with C, even though it's better. So that's like releasing the attachment. Right. So you take the actions, and then you're open to whatever happens, and you accept what happens. And you, instead of getting wrapped up or upset or having the expectations, you take an action, see where it lands you, and say, now what do I do? If everything falls apart, I always say there's no failure. It's just a bunch of experiments. So you take a step and it, shoves you towards C. You're like, wonder why that happened. What do I do now? Well, it's like, well, look at C, maybe that's better. And just reassess as you go. And instead of getting so locked into, I have to do this, and that's the only thing that can possibly happen. So life is constantly throwing curveballs, and the best thing you can do is, be resilient. And for me, that question of, what are you going to do now? Instead of like, oh, my life sucks and everything's against me and I'll never get out of here. Well, what are you going to do about it? And if you focus on what are you going to do about it, you can't spend all your time saying, well, it's
get
me.
Out of the victimizing.
Right. Take responsibility for your life and go do something about it.
Yeah. And I think I like that idea of, exactly, take responsibility and keep your mind open, because you know what, just because you've built that up in your head, I'm like a really strong believer in set no expectations, avoid disappointment, which can be widely accepted and denied at all times, but
it's hard,
I don't
but
mean it in a really bad way. But I'm always like, okay, well, if you just keep doors open, it's like you say, if you keep a door open, then maybe that's not going to work out, but something might be better. It's okay if it's different.
Well, and if you have an idea or you're going down a certain path towards something, right, and all of a sudden there's, a hurdle gets put in front of you, or something comes up to interrupt the journey that you're on, you can either just the thing that you can control is, well, that came into my life and that wasn't, obviously I wasn't meant to go down that path because nothing would have interrupted that journey if I were meant to be there. But that's not the right perspective. I think it more has to do with it takes me to what you were talking about, took me to the quote by the guy Yogi Berra, who said, if there's a fork in the road, take it. You've still got an option.
Just make a choice.
Just go make the choice and move on. I really like that one.
Right. And it's with the attraction, you may think point B is where you want to be. Well, that's your head. But what are you doing? What are you believing? What are the everyday habits that may be attracting you to C? And sometimes C isn't so good. And if you can reflect on, why am I ending up over here? I wanted to be over there. Again, you start unpacking those beliefs, and daily habits are so powerful. It's the little things you don't really notice you do all day, every day, and it creates your life. All the little choices you make all day, every day are leading you on a path. So, you just take where you are today and say, is this where I want to be? Because every day I made a choice and took actions to get me here. Is this what I want to stay with?
And I mean, it's like assuming that we as ourselves automatically know exactly what the right path is, and that's obviously just not true. And that's where we kind of got to separate ourselves from our ego of well, I had this one vision, but that obviously isn't what's working out, so how can I still get to this point that I want to get to, but maybe take another path to get there that I wouldn't have thought of otherwise? Which kind of brings me into this idea of uncertainty. We are in such unique times right now. And I think a hard truth for people to accept is how much limited control we actually have in our lives. And I think the last month or 2 months has really shown people who might have thought that they had loads of control that they really don't. How would you tell someone that is at a crisis point in their lives, whether it's this pandemic or maybe they've got something emotionally, financially, or physically going on, to help cope with uncertainty and try to find peace within it?
I think it goes back to the question of what are you going to do about it? And that kind of encapsulates what you have control over. How are you going to respond to everything, the people, the economy, the circumstances, the global crisis, whatever it is, it's going to happen and it's going to do whatever it's going to do. And you really have no control over it. All you can control is how you respond, and your responses create ripple effects. But being held hostage by the fear, it kind of just builds on itself and gets worse and worse. So the more you can focus on what am I going to do about it, it gets you out of the thinking about the gazillion things you can't control and feeling like a victim to those things. It's flipping it around and saying, what am I going to do? I lost my job. I'm going to start an online business. My family's sick. I'm going to go do what I can to take care of them. That when you focus on what you can control, which is just your response to whatever's going on around you, and you can't control what happens because of your response. If you want to go take care of family members who aren't doing well, if they don't want that, you can't really force it on them. So what are you going to do about that? Accept it and be there for them. And so it's, again, just focusing on what you can control, what you can do.
And earlier on, we talked a little bit about how we tend to be so hard on ourselves. How you're saying if someone asks how you are, and you're like, I'm awesome. And you said, we should be holding ourselves accountable for stuff. It's healthy to take responsibility for your choices and your decisions. But how do you teach someone who slips into negative thought patterns about themselves to practice self-acceptance and to not be so attached to the outcome?
In some ways, we're all very good at beating ourselves up, and anybody close to us would usually never say the things we say to ourselves. So I would say one of the things I learned in my journey is,
right.
When the monkey starts screeching all these negative things at you, you just pause and say, is that true? And look for evidence. And, true doesn't mean, because I think it is. Well, everybody has their own version of the truth. It's like if there's an accident scene and 20 people see it, they'll tell 20 different stories because of their background, their filters, their beliefs, and 100 other things. So they're an infinite versions of the truth. So if a person's getting really negative and, not self-accepting, with mindfulness, having a pause and, stopping to notice the thoughts. Like, you can't do anything about something unless you notice it. So taking the power of the pause and noticing that those things are going on again and just say, is that true? And if you, because, I don't know, because everybody else tells me differently. So why did I think that?
Yeah.
And, essentially look for evidence to the contrary.
Yeah. It's like, just stop a minute,
you'll find what you're looking for, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah.
I really like that idea of the power of the pause.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't heard that phrase like that before, but I really like that.
And I think that's the essence. For me, what made mindfulness so powerful. it's almost like, because you can't do anything about something you're not noticing. So if, for years I'd, get in arguments and be like, well, that's just the way I am. And think, I'm really unhappy being the way I am. Why do I just defend that? And it's, that pause of, it's stopping for a moment, just like I say that all the time. Why? It's not helping me, So, and it's, I've found in relationships where you have that same old argument over and over, and you're both just playing out your script. You're both egging each other on the same way you always do. And, at one point I just thought, what I always say and do always leads me down the path I don't want to go on. What do I do instead? And the first couple of times I experienced that, I didn't know what to do. So I did nothing. And I just sat and listened to the other person. And then, which is a pretty powerful thing to do and something I hadn't been doing. And suddenly, things improved. I was like, oh, okay, that was something different. And I wasn't quite sure. I was just quiet, but it turned into listening. and it turned into the other person feeling heard. Let's try that again,
Yeah, it's like the eureka moment, like, oh, this is actually a lot easier than I thought.
So it's just that half of a second to catch yourself and notice what you can notice.
So something that I think goes hand in hand with all of this is gratitude. And when we start talking about things like uncertainty and self-acceptance, for me, I have just kind of brought a practice of gratitude into my life for a few years now, and I just love how I can use it to switch my mindset on to focus on what I do have over what I don't have. So if you're someone who is sitting there and is going through this whole pandemic and is just like, I've lost my job, but maybe you're getting to spend some more time with your family that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. Like, it's just being able to take these little things and pivoting them to switch those negative processes, because we all know that that's such a slippery slope. So what are your thoughts on gratitude, and how do you recommend someone begins a relationship with it?
I would say it saved my life. I spent most of my life in a kind of a cloud of depression. And, it was just the way I was, and, it's when it's the way you are, you don't realize, oh yeah, I'm depressed because it's just the way I am. But, when you stop to reflect on it, you can see that. And, somewhere in my journey years ago, I, read about gratitude, and I was like, okay, I'll get a gratitude journal. And I just got some cheap notebook from the store, and every day I'm going to write 3 things. And it was such a struggle to think of 3 things at first. And then somebody else they called it a 10-10 exercise, where you think you have to think of 10 things you're grateful for. And that kind of gets the positive juices flowing. And then you think of 10 things that you want in your life, intentions, goals, whatever it is. And you're taking the positive vibes from, what you feel good about, and then applying that to what you want, which makes the whole process work a little better. So then, I went from my 3, and I told myself every day I have to write something different. I can't just repeat the same thing over and over, because, what's the point of that? So every day I said, I'll write 10 things, and it has to be a different 10 things every day. And, it's like journaling or anything else. At first it's hard, but you just make yourself do it. And it got to the point where I was writing pages every day, just lists of 3 pages long of what I was grateful for, until it was like, oh, time out. I got an appointment or something. And it's after writing it enough, and it changes how you see the world throughout your day, because throughout my day, subconsciously, I know I have to come up with at least 10 things tomorrow morning. So throughout the day, I'm sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously noticing what I'm grateful for, because I want to write it down. So, things like, I live in the middle of nowhere, so a commute to work is an hour and a half each way. Well, that could be really awful, or I could be like, I live in the woods, so I have an amazingly beautiful commute. I've caught myself taking pictures of, like while I'm driving, take a picture with my phone out the front of the car, just like, can you believe this? Or stopping for gas at one of the little towns here, and I'm looking straight up at Pikes Peak. And I took a picture and put it on Facebook, and it was like the most beautiful place to get your gas, or just, with this whole pandemic thing, I've got like 1,000, I've got like 1,000 things that have gotten better, because that's what I'm focusing on, because of what's going on. It's like, for me, the world's better, even though it's a little weird, but, I'm seeing the good in all of it.
Smelling the roses. Yeah, and I mean, for listeners who are maybe like thinking that's a difficult place to start, I mean, this list of gratitude, that can be something as small as I have food in the fridge, or the sun is shining, right? It doesn't have to be this huge thing. It's just these small things that we probably take for granted.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. It's the sun is shining, or there's clouds today, because, hey, usually the sun is shining, or, there's a hummingbird outside my window, the smell of a puppy, little, baby's face, somebody giving you a big hug, and, somebody said thank you, or, it's the little things that make up life. It's not the big stuff. It's the little things that create your life. And just when you shift that, like I wrote it for years, and then I just got busy when my kids were little, and, just not enough time in the day, but I made it a point of just consciously noticing and, saying thank you as I saw things or felt things or, thought of things to be grateful for. So it literally reprogrammed my mind with neuroplasticity. Instead of focusing on the negative and feeling depressed, I was constantly focusing on the positive. And over time, that it literally changed my life.
I'm curious if you've experienced this, because since I've been practicing gratitude, I've always been a glass half full type of person. But now I think since I've been practicing gratitude for the last 4 or 5 years, it might have become to the point of where I'm annoyingly optimistic. And I'm wondering if you've ever experienced that from somebody, because anytime, and I can revert to, my dad is a great example of this, where he tends to be more half glass empty. And I'll just he'll say something and I'll immediately, my instincts just put that positive spin on it. I'm like, yeah, but this could have happened too. So that's actually a good thing.
And I'll be sat at the dinner table you're so annoying. Just let him moan. Let him moan and then we'll do it.
All I can say is be the change you want to see in the world. Just don't worry about what other people think and keep doing what you're doing.
That is nice.
Thank you.
Don't worry about it. And I'd say the older you get.
Well, I guess that takes us to our last question. Can you give us a quick synopsis of your latest book, The Mindful Guide to the Law of Attraction? We want the synopsis, and what encouraged you to write it, and what are some practical tips that that our listeners and readers of the books can expect to find?
Yeah, so The Mindful Guide to the Law of Attraction, I thought of writing it because it's, what's the best way to learn something is to teach it. So, it was almost like I could tell the law of attraction was starting to work in my life. And, it just started happening. I thought, but why is that? And putting the pieces together, I thought, well, that's going to help a whole lot of people who think the law of attraction doesn't work for them like I used to. So I'm an analytical person. So it's pretty here are the steps, here's the deal, no fluffy woo-woo kind of stuff. On my blog, a lot of times I'll end a post with simple steps, and it's just, do these 3, 5, 10 things to get to this result. So with the book, at the beginning is basically a description of what is mindfulness, what is the law of attraction, kind of what are the principles behind the two of them and how do they work together. And the back of the book is a series of meditations, kind of in different parts of your life. There's a section around health, another one around wealth and abundance. And that doesn't just necessarily mean money, and love and relationships. So ways to use mindfulness to kind of get you to pause. They're meant to be, most of them are kind of meditations where you stop, take the power of the pause and start to reflect on all these different aspects of your life in different ways and consider different ways of approaching them, different ways of thinking, different ways of acting, and then going out in the world and actually trying that stuff out. So it's meant to be a bit, kind of holding your hand. So whether you're a beginner or, I've had a lot of experts in all of this say, oh, it's a good refresher. And, that I keep forgetting about that little aspect of it. So it's a good reminder. And so, yeah.
Just good encouragement and develop good habits.
Yeah. No, I think that I really like how you break it down and you just say, you give these actionable, somewhat simplistic ideas of what people can do. And it's like, well, you can put the book down right now and do one of these. And I think that's kind of the same sort of mindset that we get when we're trying to do this podcast, which has the season arc of mindfulness, where it's like, this might be a new concept to you. It might be something that you've thought of before, but you've never really been able to find a way to put it into practice. And so we want to try and offer those types of just simple things. So I just think that that's such a great thing. So absolutely, if you're hearing this and you need a book to go check out The Mindful Guide to the Law of Attraction. We're going to have a link to it in the show notes. And Paige, really, just thank you so much for your time, your experience, and just kind of giving us some of your life with mindfulness and all of that. We really appreciate it.
Well, I truly appreciate you having me on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Interview digestion.
Well, thank you so much to Paige. Just to kind of recap some of the things that she said, I just am in love with the power of the pause.
The power of the pause, and it rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, no, it's really good stuff. And I think that it's just a really good thing to be able to settle your brain, settle your thoughts down a little bit, and just have that moment of breath. When life starts getting out of hand, why not give it a shot and just kind of see where it goes? And the other thing, too, is this gratitude stuff. Guys, I've been doing it for a few years. I firmly believe in this gratitude stuff.
Yeah, and again, just that theme of how all of the experts we're speaking to, they all are basically given the same advice of saying, just stop, breathe, think, digest, analyze. And it's okay if you make mistakes. Don't be so hard on yourself. Set yourself realistic goals. Love yourself. And I think that's just a really important message that we all need to take away.
Yeah.
We are going to receive what we give out, which I'm a huge advocate of that expression as well. So
yeah, especially in chaotic times like we're in, just to have that love and appreciation for yourself, because it starts there, and then you start to notice that I do think that your mindset will begin to change, and you'll start to reflect that onto other people. And wouldn't it be just be an amazing world if someone asked you how you were doing and you said, fantastic. And they said, I'm fantastic too.
Just hug it out
just
and walk on.
Just a giant jump, double high five. How great would that be?
Yeah.
We're getting there.
Post-social distancing.
We're getting there.
Take it further.
So there are so many great resources for learning more and more about attraction and resistance. For more information from our wonderful guest today, you can visit Paige's website, www.simplemindfulness.com. There you can find her latest book as well as others she's published.
The way that you said that reminded me of the font Courier.
Mindfulness.
Just very typewriter-ish, but good, very clear. If you're looking for a more visual way to learn about this, check out the doc The Secret. It's available on Netflix and also Amazon Prime. And another great book that was really just like instrumental in my life, kind of discovering the idea of mindfulness and attraction and things like that, is called The Art of Happiness with Howard C. Cutler and then the 14th Dalai Lama. Like I said, this was so monumental for me. It came into my life at the right time. One thing that always stuck was the idea it introduced to me that if you confront a problem in life, there are two scenarios. You either have control or you don't. If you do have control, fantastic. Make the necessary changes to fix it. If you don't, then don't spend time worrying about that because you can't control it. Seems simple, right?
No.
All right, well, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode on attraction and resistance.
Viva la resistance!
And if you do want to check out Paige's book and learn more, it's called The Mindful Guide to the Law of Attraction by Paige Oldham. It's available in digital copy for a Kindle.
And on episode 9, we will be diving deeper into the world of food, looking at how we could be more mindful of eating and the benefits that will have on not only gut health, but also on mental health and general happiness. We delve a little bit deeper into the rabbit hole of food safety and food ethics, and it makes an interesting one, and it changed some of our habits actually researching it. So thank you so much. We couldn't do this without you, and let's take it over to Mr. Voiceover Guy himself.
Thanks, Lianne. Subscribe now to the Forever Break podcast on your favorite platform: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and more. If you enjoyed this episode, help us out and leave a 5-star review. And remember, you can find all the juicy details discussed in this episode in the show notes at foreverbreak.com/podcast.